Coogs House kind of took one on the chin this weekend. Let's talk a little bit about Houston losing to Alabama. Yeah, I know. We do got to talk about it.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a UH fan or just a hater who came to stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below to make sure you get the podcast in your feed each and every day. If you get your podcast in the feed each and every day, that way we can talk about the Cougs for the first listen of your day each day. Welcome to the YouTube channel. Good to see you again. We're entering week 4. We just broke over 150 subscribers, so thank you to everyone that is subscribing. Remember, we're going to give away that Marcus Sasser t-shirt we talked about in the bonus episode last Friday when we break 250. We talked to the artist that did it, so make sure to go check that in the catalog. It's a really, really cool t-shirt. It's got, I keep calling it a rock star design. I guess he called it a retro graphic tee. He's the designer, probably what he says. Anyway, if you need to get that t-shirt, make sure you enter below by subscribing so we get to 250 subscribers, and then commenting. We're going to give it to someone who leaves comments on the videos. If you can't think of anything to say because you're too depressed about the Alabama game from the weekend, say something that makes fun of Alabama barbecue chicken. It's got white sauce on it. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit in the first segment about like just broad over storylines from the Alabama game. Second segment, we're going to look some at the rotations because that was a hot topic on Twitter. And frankly, I think that's going to kind of shed some light on what Sampson's thought process is. And I feel like I kind of get what he's getting at as a coach when he's talking about things in the post game. And frankly, we talked about earlier this year. And then the last thing, we're going to talk about some bright spots as we build for this week. We got NCAA on Tuesday and a big game against Virginia at Virginia next weekend. So we got to find something to take away to build off of as well. Now, in the first segment here, let's start with big takeaways. I think first and foremost, anytime that you're going to have Marcus Sasser scoring just 9 points, I think it's fair to say like that's going to be a game that Houston struggles to score the basketball. But even with him having just 9 points, Houston got 65, right? And that's because Jamal Shead kind of picked up the slack scoring-wise from the backcourt positions. He had 19 points. And frankly, there was a stretch in the game where it felt like no one on Alabama could stay in front of Jamal Shead. I think that, we'll get to his stuff in the bright spots later. But generally speaking, Houston's not built for Shead to be the scorer. The Sampson offense has always been built around a point guard that facilitates and a maybe secondary point guard or a 2-guard that can shoot and score and those kind of things. You kind of also want a third guy that can catch and shoot. And, we've talked about, like, we had Armani Brooks once upon a time when Quentin Grimes is more of the second type guy. Corey Davis more the first guy. Like, he's had guys that fit those different roles across his time at Houston. But generally speaking, the offense is not working at its best when you're relying on the point guard to score the basketball. Now, it was a close game because Jamal Shead could. That's just not what this offense set up for, because what it got stuck in a lot was because that was the thing that was working, they went to a lot of 1-5 or sometimes 1-4 high pick and rolls. And that's to say that they spread out and just had usually J1 Roberts, occasionally Reggie Chaney, very rarely Jarace Walker, coming up to set a ball screen on the point guard because the initial downhill action was the best offense they had. And with how fast Jamal Shead's playing, that was obviously fairly effective for stretches of the game. However, that's a heavy impetus you're putting on the tax on the energy of your best defender as well, right? And second, it also is relying on a lot of scoring coming from a guy that's not typically a scorer, because more often than not, once a guy is fast as Shead, the switch won't work because the bigger guy is too slow, and the guy fighting through the screen, because Houston's got really tough bigs, will have trouble fighting over the screen. Schematically, I thought it was interesting that they did this a lot, especially when they went to the 2 big lineup after Tremont Mark fouled out. So let's talk about that a little bit. J1 Roberts had a big dunk. It was like just under 14, I think, under 14 minutes to extend the lead out to 12. That kind of felt like a dagger. It was he faked the handoff to Sass and then went all the way to the rim. Dunk went home, and I thought it was going to tear the backboard down, and dunk went home. And that felt like a dagger until a few minutes later when Tremont Mark fouled out. Now, when Tremont Mark fouled out, it really put Houston in a bind. And I don't want to blame referees for things, but he did have 2 offensive fouls, and both of which I thought were like, interesting. I'll leave it at that. I'm not one to blame refs, so I'm not going to do that, except for Scott Foster and Rockets, but that's a whole different podcast. So the 2 big lineup they go to after that didn't play Jarace Walker. We'll get to rotation in a second, but they didn't use Jarace Walker. Instead, they went to a lot more Reggie Chaney and Juwan Roberts, or pulling in Ramon Walker as the third guard with one of those 2 guys as the big. And what ended up happening was it kind of put the offense in a lull, because Ramon Walker, for all things he does well, is not a scorer, not a shooter. He's just a like all-out hustle guy. And that's great, except that Houston didn't have a big enough cushion to not score, and Alabama was able to go to a 4-guard lineup, which is unique for them. They haven't shown that this year. Sampson said as much in the postgame. And in that 4-guard lineup, they could make up for being small by doubling off of Ramon Walker, because they have to worry about him catching and shooting, right? And that doesn't happen with a guy like Tremont Mark out there, right? The other thing I think was interesting is in the 2 big lineup, they couldn't really do the 1-4, 1-5 pick and roll. Those opening up sheds so much, which is why they played Ramon Walker. But when they did that with the 2 bigs and they tried to set the 4-5 or screen or 4-1 or 5-1 screen, what's interesting there up top is there's another big in the lane. And so the speed of shed is no longer as important, right? Because he's driving. There's no defense 3 seconds in college basketball. He's driving at the lane, and there's a big guy waiting there for him. And frankly, because they were going 4 guard for Alabama, because they were trying to figure out something that would work, just throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall, figure out what worked, and that did. The guy guarding the guy screening wasn't the same kind of athletic mismatch that you'd had for much of the game before that. Now, I'm not saying that schematically they've got to find something else, although I think there are options. And we talked about early in the season, I like when they get Jarace Walker and a floppy on the baseline. Kind of gets a lot of room to operate. He's kind of just a different athlete than most guys get the ball in that area. I do think that at times Sampson felt hamstrung by it being early in the season. So you've only had so many things that you've worked on. And he has openly said they practice offense about once a week because of how intensive their defensive practices are. I mean, remember after the Kent State game, he said like they hadn't had an offensive focused day yet. And I don't mean to say like they should. I'm not criticizing Sampson. That's just realistically where they are in teaching the young guys, Jarace in particular, the defensive scheme and setup. The other thing I think that's got to happen here is we'll talk about rotation in a second, but we need a guy to get on the floor that can shoot. And Ramon Walker, for all the things he does very, very well, is not that guy. Juwan Roberts and Reggie Chaney, for all the things they do very, very well, are more traditional bigs that are not that guy. They face guarded Marcus Sasser and took him out of the game effectively. He had a couple of really nice moves, and one layup that kind of felt during the run where Houston got up by, I think the lead got to 15. That did feel like that's thing we'll see replicated. You'll see teams do whatever they can to take Sasser out of the game. And so that's why I'm not so worried about, like, if you're going to play 4-on-4 and take Sasser out of the game, expend all your energy doing, well, we're the number 1 team in America for a reason. I mean, we ought to be able to find other ways to score and make you get out of that. And so I think we'll get there as well. It's also December. I'm not that worried about figuring these things out. That's why you get on tape in December. The 2 big things interesting because it worked so well against St. Mary's, a traditionally big team. And I think there's like reason to think that if it's going to work against a much bigger team than St. Mary's, why wouldn't it have worked against this 4-guard lineup in Alabama? And I can already see on the timer, I'm going to go a little bit long in this segment, but I think that what's interesting there is that because it worked against St. Mary's because Houston's athletic bigs could keep up with the St. Mary's unathletic guards on the perimeter. Against Alabama, whichever big was guarding a more traditionally perimeter guy on the perimeter was kind of a fish out of water. And it's not to say that Alabama's a very good basketball team. They are going to make a run to win the SEC. They're going to play Kentucky and some other good teams, I'm sure, but they're very good. And so their guard play was able to break down those bigs off the bounce. And it wasn't that the guard that broke it off the bounce necessarily scored, although he did often. Then it forces rotations and punctures and things in the defense that get off. And then you see the kick out to the one kid. What was his name? Sears, Mark Sears. You see the kick out to him for 3. And I told you guys he can make kick out threes. And he did, and it burned, right? So those kinds of things happen once you get kind of an athletic mismatch out there. And then suddenly you saw that a little bit more as Tramon Mark came off the floor. And again, he had 2 offensive fouls I thought were questionable, but he had 3 fouls that weren't. And frankly, the 5th foul was the lesser questionable of the 2 offensive fouls. And I know like some other people, I'm not going to throw people under the bus online, but some other bigger Houston Cougar content people were really opposed to the fouls and really upset about them. But my bigger thing were the inconsistencies because I didn't think the 3 refs were on the same page. The one that called the 2 offensive fouls was the same guy. However, I think there were other times they were letting that kind of stuff go. You saw Reggie Chaney get fouled on a rebound one time, and then like 3 possessions later had the exact same scenario happen and get no foul called. And like those kinds of things, I think more what bugs me than the fact that Tramon Mark got those calls. I would be remiss to say that his sub, most naturally, the guy that got the most minutes was Reggie Chaney. And Reggie Chaney had a bunch of, but Houston also went like, I think my count here is 0 for 8 on free throws down the stretch, including the front end of a 1-and-1. And that's just hard to win a basketball game when it's a close game. They're going to foul you to put you on the line. And then, frankly, when you're going to attack to get baskets, if you're going to miss your free throws, they're going to foul you to make sure you don't get layups. And Houston got in this rut where they would get fouled, miss free throws, come down and give up an Alabama basket. They'd get fouled, miss free throws, come down and get an Alabama basket. And again, that was just 6 points. I mean, Chaney missed 6 of them, right? And Tramon Mark doesn't. That's the key to this game. Reggie Chaney does so many things to impact winning in so many different ways. And I don't mean to say that he didn't make plays that also, if Houston had won the game, wouldn't have helped them win the game. He missed the free throws down the stretch. And frankly, it looked like to me any Cougar missing out there would have missed the free throws down the stretch, but it felt like he missed them when they counted. Speaking of when things count, Locked On is brought to you by LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn is the best place to find your next hire for your new business. These days, every potential new hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have the access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Once you got what you want out there, you can add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile and spread the word that you're hiring. There are simple tools like screening questions that can easily focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. And it's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to find and talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so in the second segment, I said I was going to talk about rotations, and I kind of hinted at this earlier. But the big Twitter blow up I saw amongst some people, and I saw it on Facebook as well, like, where is Jarace Walker? Because after that Tramon Mark foul out, there was a noticeable void, and we didn't see him for a lot of the game. I will point out that on a bum hamstring, and it sounds like his hamstring is better, but not 100%, he played 28 minutes, and he went 3-4 from the field, 2-4 from the free throw line, had 8 points, 5 rebounds, 2 blocks, 2 steals, big defensive player, and a couple of assists. Now, I think what happened here is something that I think we'll talk about Sampson and how he does in a second. On the defense side of the ball, he was not quite up to snuff as far as what Kelvin wanted. And then B, I'm not writing off this idea that he's still dealing with a sore hamstring, got 28 minutes, and after a while he'd been sitting down, we're not going to push it for 30. We thought we were up by 15, and now we're not, and he's been sitting down for a while. Jarace Walker is a top-end pro prospect. He is a top 10 pick. I might take him as high as 5, 6, 7, depending on the team and situation and so on. And he is that kind of an athlete, right? We don't have those at Houston quite often, and he's that kind of a guy that clearly, no questions asked, ask any of your draft aficionados, he's a top 10 pick. That's because of the potential on athleticism. And defensively, it shows up. I mean, he is a guy that has the potential to guard 1 through 5 as well as anyone in college basketball. And by the time we get to March, I'm putting my chips on that he will, right? On Saturday, he had a couple blocks, had a couple steals, but man, it felt like he was really gambling. And gambling's okay when you hit 51% of the time, right? The thing he did that I feel like sticks in Sampson's craw, and he alluded to it as much without mentioning Jarace in the postgame, is that he fouled a 3-point shooter twice. Now, when I went to the coaches clinic in the fall, before the season started, right? And I've cited that several times because I think it gave me good insight on kinds of things that Sampson teaches. And frankly, it also made me a better coach for it. So I recommend going to those kind of things. He mentioned that the unique thing they do to contest threes in the modern game is they don't chop their feet. They teach to sprint to contest and like fly by and then plant your foot when you land and get in front of the guy to box out, right? They teach that because you're less likely to foul. And they also have trust in their rotations and stuff behind you that the guy pump fakes and you soar, they've got something set up, right? It's unique. It's different. It's also bluntly not what Jarace did on either one of his times he fouled a three-point shooter, right? And that seemingly, I mean, it's a game you lost by 6 and you fouled a three-point shooter and gave them 3 free throws twice. So do the math. Also, I wonder if that's the kind of thing where like this is a teaching moment for Sampson in December where we'll see what we can do without you. You know, we'll take one on the chin here, but we need to get this thing right come February, March. And Sampson's done that before with previous freshmen. I mean, we think about like what Quentin Grimes did in his time at Houston, but think about those first 2 months, right? The first 2 months when Quentin Grimes was on campus, he was not the Quentin Grimes that's now doing whatever, it's like 20 points a game for the Knicks. Like, it's not the same guy, right? Think about like when Armani Brooks showed up, small, skinny kid from Round Rock comes to U of H. And he had to like work his way in because he was not picking up the way that Sampson and Houston teach defense. Walker has not had to struggle to find minutes. He is too good an athlete to not. But clearly there's also these same teaching moments happening with him. I do think it's interesting that the thing that's unique about him that he gives Houston so much versatility with and why that they were the number 1 team in the country with him on the floor is he has an offensive diversity that Chaney and Ramon Walker don't have, right? He wasn't using it. And I wonder if part of that was because Alabama was guarding with more like 6'6", 6'7" guys. And also Brandon Miller, the guy covering him, is for the bulk of the first half until Alabama would eventually go small. Brandon Miller, the guy covering him for when they were playing big, admittedly, is also a top 10 to 15 pick, right? I mean, that's a very, very talented 6'8", 6'9" basketball player. They know each other very well. And so I wonder if there was some of that too in the first half where he's like, I can't quite, this guy's as athletic as me, as long as me. I got to figure something else out because bluntly, I know he did the IMG. I just dropped my pen. He did the IMG Academy thing where you play on the national schedule and all that. But admittedly, like, it's not the same, right? Like you can play the top teams across high school basketball coming up to play a 1 versus 8 game, not a like March Madness, a number 1 in the country versus number 8 in the country game in December at home. It's a different kind of pressure and trying to find those gaps. Like a thing he does very well is he has a great floater for a guy his size. He didn't get to that very often. I have down that he made 1 out of 3 by my account. I guess we define what floater a little bit different, you and I, but that's not to utilize that to like get a lane and then go over a 7-footer. He needs to be doing that more. I also have down that he did not attempt a 3. Part of the deal with him as a like quasi big and small is that he stretches the defense. He didn't pull anyone out to cover him. And I'm not saying that he has to shoot 50% to be nice. But he has to attempt them to make them come cover him, right? Like that. There's also some of that. And so I think that Houston will be better when he is better. And so I get why people wanted him on the floor, but I also get what Sampson was doing. And I get that Sampson is like, hey, guys, this is December. I get to be pissed off for a day about this, and we're going to keep it moving. He said this whole time that the number 1 seed is a rental. You don't get to hold on to it. You just want to have it at the end of the season. And the number 1 overall ranking, it's a rental. And we just lost it, and we hope to get it back, and we hope to have it back in March and April. Other guys people clamored for, I saw a lot of people wanting Emmanuel Sharp to come in because Houston needed the shooting, and Emmanuel Sharp absolutely solves that problem. He had a major leg injury legitimately 12 months ago, and that's why he enrolled in Houston early last January. And I assume, based on who they've had him cover when he goes out there in other games and how he's kind of been like the 9th guy that doesn't quite get in every game, I assume that while he can shoot them out of the slump that they were in offensively, and it would be a great guy to have out there, akin to Armani Brooks I mentioned a second ago, he is not defensively ready to go yet, whether it's healing from injury, whether it's understanding the scheme because he's a true freshman, or whatever the case is. I assume that that's what's going on there, right? And then Terrence Arsenault, he did end up getting minutes in this game as opposed to traditional freshmen in Sampson's system might not. He got 8 minutes. he in his 8 minutes he kind of looked lost and he looked like a fish out of water. And I think that's the kind of thing where Kelvin Sampson, assistant coach Kelvin Sampson, who kind of has the guards to himself in a lot of ways, you'll see. I think you'll see some film study development and growth from that for Terrence. Terrence is obviously a great shooter and a great offensive basketball player that could have helped Houston, but he goes like a little jittery with the ball in the sense that like the ball is quick to get out of his hands. And then defensively, he's one of the guys that got beat off the dribble. And if you're not helping us out on offense and you're getting beat off the dribble on defense, you're only going to get 8 minutes. Like I have people, so I'm like, whoa, he could come in and shoot and score. And it's like, he had 8 minutes and he really didn't. Anyway, that's my take on the rotations, that I understand why they were the way they were in December. I'm just not sure that that's going to be the way they are in March. And I think that's because there's natural growth to this team that, while it has like veterans like Sasser and Shed, also relies pretty heavily on underclassmen and new guys. Underclassmen being, J1 Roberts is a sophomore. We got to remember these kind of things, right? Then Jarace Walker and Terrence Arson being freshmen. Just kind of younger guys. Tremont Mark, speaking of younger guys, is, I guess, technically a redshirt sophomore, but with how much time he's missed hurt, he's in a lot of ways. Sampson said it himself after like the first or second game of the season. Tremont Mark is kind of like a second semester freshman, and that's like all he's got different as far as playing time and games go. And so it's just a team that had the #1 ranking and had a tough competitive game, and frankly got up 15 in said game, and then had the wheels kind of fall off. And I don't think that has to be more than that if things get fixed the way they should get fixed. And I have no indication that Sampson won't do that. Speaking of indications, did you know that December is kind of a rough month for getting your stuff stolen? Now, I have to say that this really sticks out to me, and I'll tell you what my story in a second, but Simply Safe is here to help with those kinds of things. At Locked On Cougs, we believe that every home should be where you and your family feel safest, especially over the holidays. This season, give yourself and your family the gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system, Simply Safe. And now Simply Safe is offering Locked On Cougs listeners 40% off a new security system. But don't put this off. Get it today. Here's why I love it. They have all kinds of cameras and triggers and those kind of details that set off all kinds of things around your home. I have a personal story at an old place we lived. I had my car parked outside a garage. As you can tell, sneaker person, and a couple sneakers and a gym bag in the back, a couple to wear, a couple to play in, etc. I think I had 4 total pair and gym bag in the back of my car. And someone broke into the trunk and stole the bag, stole other things. There's a computer in there and that kind of stuff. Boom, it's all gone. When I called the cops the next day, they asked me, well, what time this happened? I have no idea. It happened overnight. What kind of car were they driving? How would I know that? Well, I had no information other than it happened sometime between when I got home at 10 o'clock and when I left and was trying to leave the next morning at 9 o'clock, right? And that's too big a window for anything to happen. Nothing productive happened. I'm still missing those sneakers. So if you have those red pair of 3s, the all red, I have the red and white. I want the all red back. Anyway, this would not happen if we had a Simply Safe home. You can have, they have an emergency 24/7 positional monitoring service using Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe, captures all critical evidence and verifies if that is real, so you can get a higher priority police response. It's a whole home security system with advanced sensors for every room's window and door, the HD security cameras for inside and out, and I'm telling you from experience that outside camera matters. Smarter ways to detect motion that alert you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. 24/7 monitoring professionals cost less than $1 a day. That's less than half the price of traditional home security systems. With top-rated Simply Safe, stay in complete control of your system. Arm or disarm, unlock for guests, access your cameras or adjust settings anytime, anywhere. Don't miss your chance to save big on my favorite security system. Get 40% off any new system at Locked On or at simplysafe.com/LockedOnCollege. That's simplysafe.com/LockedOnCollege. There's no safe like Simply Safe. All right, now I've told you my sob story about sneakers and those kinds of things. Let's talk about some of the things that went right in this game, because I think it's worth pointing out that there was a stretch in the first part of the second half where it's this is the best team in America. And frankly, the goal for Sampson and his crew the rest of the season will be to play like that stretch for the entire game, right? They were locking up Alabama, taking them out of stuff they wanted to do defensively. And on offense, they were finding ways to get Shed downhill, to get Roberts open on some stuff heading downhill, also getting to his left hand. And then they actually still found ways to pop open Sasser, even while he's being face guarded by the best defensive player at Alabama, right? And so, like, we could talk about Shed being a scorer and how it's nice to see him get 19 points. He also had, like, the dunk of the season thus far. It'll be the dunk of the college basketball season until I see something otherwise. A little breakaway, Tremont Mark has a steal, 2 dribbles, bounce pass. It got to Shed in transition, jumped over the top of a 7-footer. I mean, the dunk of the year, 6'1" guy over 6'10" guy. Big play. I will also say that, like, Houston's defensive game plan against what Alabama wanted to do worked, right? Doubling down the bigs took them out of their game. And frankly, I know it's hard to say, like, well, they still got to jump a bunch of threes off, because Alabama did shoot 23 3-pointers, but they only made, 7 of them? And frankly, 2 of those were Mark Sears down the stretch once they'd gone to their 4-guard stuff. And one of, I think it's Noah Burnett. Anyway, one of his were also down the stretch and they got to the guard stuff. Doubling down the bigs did not hurt us from the 3-point line in a way that I think X's and O's geniuses might have thought it would, right? And so I think that's really important as well, that, like, when they knew what the scheme was coming, because they'd done their tape study, they knew what they're doing, they'd watched Alabama this year, they were ready for it, and they took stuff away and made Alabama find something else. The issue was that thing that they found worked. And so that's when Alabama's a good basketball team. We got to adjust on the fly. And frankly, had they made their free throws, we might be sitting here saying that, Houston survives, right? They did make the free throws, so they didn't survive, but they got Alabama and got a big lead by getting Alabama out of what they wanted to do. I also think it's worth pointing out that, like, a team that I was worried about, you heard me last week talking with Luke Robinson, you heard me on my own on Thursday, last week talking about how I was worried that they were bigger than Houston and that they'd beat us out with Bediako or this big freshman, Brandon Miller. And those guys didn't make, between the 2 of them, 1 single field goal. And I think that goes back to what I'm talking about, where, like, the defensive game plan worked until Alabama went to an offensive game plan they had not shown all season. Now, does Houston need to find some way to play small? Yes. I would have thought that was the easy part. Admittedly, it made harder when Tremont Mark is not out there, but I would have thought that's the easy part. And so that's the thing for Houston to work on this week. They got North Carolina A&T on Tuesday. They got Virginia on Saturday up at Virginia. And frankly, recording this before the AP poll come out, so I don't know when you're listening to it. But that might be a time where Houston's playing against the number 1 team in the country. And frankly, a time that Houston be like, let's go get this number 1 ranking back, right? We'll be bringing that kind of stuff down all week here at Locked On Cougs. So make sure you subscribe to the podcast to get the latest. You can talk to me on Twitter, Instagram, whatever, at Painsworth512, Painsworth, the Painsworth 512 on Instagram, Twitter, and all of those good things. I'm happy to talk Cougs, Rockets, Astros. The Texans had a super competitive game on Sunday. It's a fun time to be a Houston sports fan, whether your team's either rebuilding, compete for titles, and nothing in between. So let's talk about it on Twitter. Then it's at Painsworth512. If you're looking for a second listen today, I'm going to recommend Locked On College Basketball, because they're going to talk about things like the fallout of this number 1 seed falling again and and all those kinds of things. And I don't feel about being that impressed about it. So if you want to talk to them, go listen to that show about that as well. Thank you all so much again for tuning in to Locked On Cougs today. Again, we'll be back tomorrow for an each and every day this week, leading up to North Carolina A&T, and then getting ready for UVA and things like that. Locked On Cougs, the primary Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go Cougs.